In India, as recently as the year 2000, the British economy was close to 4 times bigger than India's, 3.6 times bigger, year 2000. Today, UK is smaller than India. And by 2050, India will be 4 times bigger than UK. So look at that. 2000, the British are 4 times bigger. 2050, India is 4 times bigger. That's a major structural shift, which is why I wrote a Financial Times article saying it's time for UK to give up its permanent seat in the Security Council to India. I mean, the British should be gracious about it, right? They got to rule India for 200 years, so the least they can do is repay back India by giving their permanent seat to India.
嗨，欢迎大家来到果果的新闻频道。本期重要看点，一个让西方震惊的数字。1980年，欧盟的经济规模是中国的10倍。今天呢，两者已经相当。预计到2050年，中国将是欧盟的2倍。更戏剧性的是，英国和印度。2000年，英国经济还是印度的4倍。那时的英国人可能还在回味着殖民印度的荣光。但仅仅25年后，印度已经反超英国。到2050年，印度将是英国的4倍，完全颠倒过来。新加坡前外交官马凯硕抛出一个大胆建议，英国应该把联合国安理会常任理事国席位让给印度。他的理由很直接，你们统治印度200年，现在把这个位置还给人家，不过分吧？但更劲爆的还在后面。特朗普第一任任期，中国面对贸易战手足无措。现在呢，中国一出手切断稀土供应，美国立马改口，对华态度180度大转弯。而美国和印度27年的精心培育，差点在几周内毁于一旦。全球权力正在发生你想不到的重构，而这一切就发生在我们眼前。今天我们就来聊聊这个巨变的时代，到底谁在掌握主动权？请看前方发来的报道。
Look at the 2 biggest giants in Asia, China and then India. In the case of China, in the year 1980, the combined GNP of the European Union was 10 times bigger than China, 1980. Today, European Union and China are about the same size. And by 2050, European Union will be half the size of China. So in one human lifetime, the European Union goes from being 10 times bigger than China to becoming half the size of China. Just one structural shift. But the Europeans haven't woken up and realized that that's where they are today.
They're on holiday.
And
September.
So that's right. They're still on vacation. In the case of India, I like to compare India to the United Kingdom, right? Because, I mean, that's a natural comparison. It's hard to believe that 100 years from now, 300 million of our ancestors from India were ruled by 100,000 Englishmen, right? 100 years ago, amazingly. And today, if you send 100,000 Englishmen to India, they'll be massacred. So, and even if you compare the British and UK and India, as recently as the year 2000, the British economy was close to 4 times bigger than India's, 3.6 times bigger, year 2000. Today, UK is smaller than India. And by 2050, India will be 4 times bigger than UK. So look at that. 2000, the British are 4 times bigger. 2050, India is 4 times bigger. That's a major structural shift, which is why I wrote a Financial Times article saying it's time for UK to give up its permanent seat in the Security Council to India. I mean, the British should be gracious about it, right? They got to rule India for 200 years, so the least they can do is repay back India by giving their permanent seat to India. I'm surprised that that suggestion wasn't picked up in India by more people, you know. So when if those of you who have connections in Delhi, please call them and say, please echo that call. and I want to emphasize that this is not a frivolous point. This is actually a serious point. The one thing I learned after being ambassador to the UN for over 10 years is that the founders of the UN intended the veto to be given to the great powers of the day and not the great powers of yesterday. which is why the British have gone by their sell-by date already. And it's time for the British to give up their seat, in the permanent seat. And I want to emphasize that the British are acutely aware that their seat is hard to justify, which is why they haven't used their veto for over 40 years, 50 years. They dare not use their veto. The minute they use their veto, I really want to say, who are you? That's why they don't even dare to. So they are internally aware that the sell-by date has come. But so these are the structural shifts. But at the same time, even in the last 6 months, I must say that if you had asked me about these two things in January, would these two surprises have happened? In January, I would have said, no, not possible. But these two surprises have happened. The first surprise, right? You know, when Donald Trump first launched his trade war against China in his first term in 2018, the Chinese were defenseless. They didn't know what to do. And they were running around in circles trying to figure out how to respond to Donald Trump. And so they couldn't retaliate. They just had to take whatever Trump hurled at them. This time around, the Chinese are able to draw a red line in the sand and say, watch out. You touch me, I'm going to touch you equally painfully. And as you know, when they cut off the supply of rare earths and magnets, the pain was so excruciating. Suddenly you notice that the Trump administration is so polite towards China. Now, you look at the tone they adopt when they speak to China. So in the last 6 months, the big shift is that suddenly US has implicitly accepted China as its peer competitor. This just happened in the last few months. Big shift. And the other big surprise, if you had told me in January this year that, you know, India, which has been cultivated by president after president by the US, right, from Bill Clinton to George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Donald Trump 1 to Joe Biden, that this 27 years of cultivation would be wiped out in a few weeks. I would have said impossible. This is a deep commitment on the part of the US to the US-India relationship. It's bipartisan, one of the few bipartisan things. He will hold steady regardless of what happens. But you've seen how damaged the relationship has become. And it's amazingly painful because there are lots of unnecessary slights and blows to India. Like calling India a dead economy, right? Imposing additional tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. Excuse me, China buys more Russian oil. How much were tariffs increased on China? 0. See? That's what I mean about China. And then look at the way Asim Munir was invited to the White House. Calculated insult. So all these things show that sometimes in geopolitics, what you don't expect can also happen.
Thank you, thank you. So building on your point on just in a few weeks, they also say what goes up very fast can also sort of unwind very fast. And I know that, Ajay, you've taken a stake in the ground and you said that watch out for the next, I think, 3 months is what you've said. So talk to us about the India's position and what do you foresee in the signaling that India is sending out in terms of its diplomatic postures, priorities, and finally with a hint to the business ecosystem. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Rajan. Thanks. Great to be here. Great to be in the company of Kishore. That's an honor and a privilege to be part of this group conversation. And congratulations on leveraging this group of 3,000, which is a living business bridge between India and Singapore, and actually having these conversations. So I would, I think, be speaking today as an IIM alumnus who's just wandered into geopolitics for 35 years, but now I inhabit the dark space intersection between geopolitics and business. So I think to Kishore's last point, about the shift in geopolitics. I would make the argument that the larger play remains the same. There are some shifts which are long-term and hugely significant. For instance, I would say the US-China contestation perhaps began in Trump 1.0 when they declared a sort of new Cold War between the US and China. But on the US-India piece again, I think what we are seeing in the Trumpian revolution of this year is a very capricious and volatile United States, which we as the governments are trying to factor in, but the media and public doesn't. So we had a rough August in the relationship with the US because the July was fine. In August, you suddenly had 25% duty and then the pileup of 25% duty. So this was in what was in Trump's mind in this Trumpian revolution, the art of the deal. So there were the art of two deals that was happening. He was playing chicken with India, trying to get a better deal than the one we had negotiated in 5 rounds. And then he was trying to get a deal out of Putin in Russia. And India became collateral damage. So already things are changing in September, and part of the reason was India also made a short-term projection of optics, which gave a larger message that, look, if you push this relationship a little too much, then India will simply have to live in a world bypassing the United States. And India is capable of doing that. So I think that messaging remained, and now September we are in a more comfortable space. The new ambassador of the US to India is being confirmed, and we have a situation where Trump is making politer noises than he did. So my prediction would be, or speculation would be, that in the next 3 months we have a trade deal that will be done with the United States, and don't be surprised if Trump shows up in November in India for the Quad Summit and signs the biggest deal of the century, as he will spin it, and all will be well, and this will be a little nightmare we had a couple of months. But just on the last point you made, what are India's priorities? India's now made a fairly clear statement of where it wants to be in the next 2 decades. 2047, we want to be a developed economy, $30 trillion of GDP, maybe 15 to 20,000 per capita, and that is the goal. Part of it which remains understated or unstated is that in this evolving global order, India would like to be a pole, like to be a rule setter, not a rule taker. And therefore, it is important for India to play that game and also play the geopolitics in a way. I think India's primary strategic partner will remain the United States in the foreseeable future, in the next 3 decades. Russia and the European Union will remain critical partners. And China, I think, will remain a strategic competitor. But the difference now is, in the short-term politics, is that the US is not a fully trusted partner. That it's a volatile country, and India will have its, kind of hedging strategies there. And for China, it is important for India to do tactical adjustments, not strategic resets, because there would be a strategic competition, but the tactical adjustments, I think, of taking care of the $138 billion of trade and the dependence on multiple, value chains. So India will continue to look at adjusting with China, and not just on the border and on the Pakistan question, but also on sort of ensuring that the trade goes on unmolested.
Got it. Thank you. What stood out from your sharing really was, it is by November that make sure your FDs and your other things are maturing, because keep some liquidity. That might be a good time just before November to buy Indian stocks. Okay, cool. So let's actually build on that. what chips does India have? Because you spoke about the chips that China has created on the negotiating table, right, with the rare earth minerals and so on. So what chips does India have to put on the table to get Donald Trump to act differently?
Well, India's used some of the chips in terms of already, as we said, the optics of India, saying that we could be aligning with a different set of countries if the US proves too volatile. And that had an impact in US domestic politics, where the question was being raised, has Trump lost India? And therefore you see the better noises coming from Marco Rubio and others, and Trump's key aide coming as ambassador to India, and very explicitly and kind of simplistically saying that he said in his Senate confirmation hearing that we don't want India to go too close to China, and we want to pull it back. So, that is a chip. But what Kishore mentioned, China. And India does not have that kind of leverage that China has, because, China used that. China demonstrated its ability to weaponize the trade and weaponize their dependence on the value chain, so by rare earth minerals. And we've seen that in the Indian context as well. The Foxconn engineers being withdrawn, trade, magnets, and so on. So I think the chips that India holds are not in the trade domain, but certainly in the domain of geopolitical alignments, that India could change the emphases it would place on the US relationship. And as Kishore mentioned, this is a relationship that is 27 years on a trajectory which has been positive. And Trump 1.0 himself took this forward in giving the Quad content and raising it to the summit level. So I feel that once we review Trump 2.0 3 years later, it won't be a story that will be as pessimistic as it appeared in August. It might be a better story.
精彩视频看完了，马凯说通过具体数据描绘了一幅引人深思的全球权力转移图景。1980年欧盟 GDP 是中国的10倍，如今两者相当，预计2050年中国将是欧盟的2倍。英国在2000年经济规模是印度的4倍，如今印度已超越英国，2050年将反超4倍。这种一个人类生命周期内的结构性巨变确实发生了，但西方似乎仍未充分意识到这一现实啊。马凯硕建议英国将安理会常任理事国席位让给印度，理由是联合国创始人本意是赋予当今强国而非昨日强国否决权。这个观点虽有现实基础，但过于简化了国际政治的复杂性。权力转移从来不是线性的经济指标转换，而涉及军事、外交、历史等多重因素。马凯硕还分析了中美印三角关系的微妙变化。马凯硕指出，与特朗普第一任期中国措手不及不同，这次中国能够划定红线，通过稀土等手段反制，迫使美国改变对华态度，而美英关系在短短几周内从27年精心培育到严重受损，又可能在几个月内修复，展现了当前的地缘政治的高度不确定性。与印度明确了2047年成为发达经济体 GDP 达35万亿美元的目标，并希望在全球秩序中成为规则制定者而非规则接受者。印度将美国视为主要战略伙伴，但不再完全信任，将中国视为战略竞争者，但会进行战术调整以维护1380亿美元的贸易关系。这段发言揭示了一个多极化、高度不稳定的新世界格局。传统西方中心正在解体，但新次序尚未确立。各国都在这个过渡期摸索自己的位置，灵活性比僵化的联盟更重要。谢谢大家观看，喜欢请点赞、评论加订阅，你的支持是我最大的动力。比心，明天见，拜拜。